Hello and welcome to TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya and this is Break the Fake. Russia has decided to prove to the world once again that its absurdity knows no bounds. The Russian government has proposed that Vladimir Putin withdraw from the European Convention for the Prevention of Torture and Inhuman Treatment. Now, TASS reports that as if it were just a mere bureaucratic update, as if it were not a matter of human rights, but rather a refusal to renew a Netflix subscription. Now, Russian propaganda isn't even trying very hard to justify the move. Publicly withdrawing from the convention is also a propaganda play designed to scare the population with the threat of harsh punishment for any hint of disloyalty. Now, Russia joined the convention back in 1996 as a member of the Council of Europe. In March 2022, it was expelled from the Council for its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Since then, the Kremlin has been gradually cutting off its European ties, first the European Court of Human Rights, now the Committee on Torture. Moscow has obviously decided, who needs international obligations when we are doing so well with torture on our own? Well, the convention requires countries to allow independent inspections of prisons and detention centers. But Russia clearly prefers to keep its doors closed, especially when screams, bruises, and traces of electric shocks are involved. In fact, Russia has never fully complied with its obligations under this convention, and since the start of the full-scale invasion, there have been widespread reports of torture of Ukrainian prisoners, both military and civilian. Now, if Russia denounces the convention, the Kremlin will strip itself of even its formal obligation not to use torture, basically giving itself a free pass to ignore international human rights rules completely. And if you think there's no evidence, well, let's show you the stories from Ukrainian prisoners of war who returned from Russian captivity. This is Andrei Yusov. Now, he was wounded and captured in March 2024. While in Russian custody, a Russian surgeon operated on him, but cruelly left a scar on his body saying, "Glory to Russia," that's Slava Rossiya. Now, following his release, Andrei was hospitalized and the inscription will be removed with lasers. Volodymyr Tsema-Bursa. In April 2022, a soldier from the 56th Separate Motorized Infantry Brigade left Azovstal and was taken prisoner. He spent 20 months in Russian captivity, enduring torture in Olenivka, and lost 38 kilograms. After his return from captivity, doctors diagnosed him with multiple chronic conditions. And how can we not mention the terrorist attack carried out by Russia on Olenivka itself? Now, the United Nations confirmed that Russia was responsible for the July 2022 strike on the prison in the Russian-occupied Donetsk region. Now, 50 Ukrainian prisoners of war were killed and 130 others were injured. The explosions hit an industrial zone in a newly constructed building that was to be specially equipped for holding prisoners taken from Azovstal. The building had just been completed 2 days earlier, and some of the Ukrainian defenders were transferred there immediately before the attack. Now, Russia's withdrawal from the European Convention for the Prevention of Torture is not just a bureaucratic gesture, but a deliberate step toward normalizing brutality and shielding its crimes from scrutiny. By abandoning even the pretense of adhering to international human rights standards, the Kremlin signals both to its own citizens and to the world that it intends to rule through fear, through secrecy, and through violence. The stories of tortured Ukrainian prisoners and the massacre at Olenivka are grim reminders of what such, quote, freedom from accountability truly means. This move is less about legal formality than about legitimizing cruelty as a tool of power. Belarus without potatoes is like France without baguettes, Italy without pasta, or Russia without propaganda. But 2025 will go down in history. The land that once called its potatoes its second bread and a source of national pride is now facing a shortage for the first time. And yes, even the Belarusian dictator is fuming.
Людям должно быть по карману самое простое. Капуста, лук, картошка, морковка, яблоки. Выполнили мое поручение по стабилизационным фондам и обеспечению в этот переходный зимний период? население этими продуктами не выполнили, и за это ответите. И вы, Василий Николаевич, вы мне не пишите свои опусы и сказки на 25 листов. Мне некогда их читать, принимайте меры. Поручения были даны вам, были даны губернаторам и прочим. Заключите с торговыми сетями договор, положите на хранение картошку и прочее, прочее. Оказывается, у нас картошки нет. У нас картошка насколько подорожала? Межсезонный период рост цен на картофель какой? 8% в этом году за январь-февраль. Это только в этом году. Так что мы картошки не можем произвести нужное количество, положить в погреб и потом населению продать. Василий Николаевич, разберитесь и внесите предложение, выгнать надо к чертовой матери этих руководителей. Картошку не можем произвести в достаточном количестве, чтобы цены за 2 месяца 10% цены подскочили на картофель.
The reason is banal and painfully Soviet: price regulation. Back in 2022, the authorities banned raising the cost of basic products, including potatoes. Selling above cost price? Forbidden. Do it? Well, you get a fine. The result? Growing potatoes became unprofitable. Belarusian farmers reduced production, and the state, as always, found a brilliant solution: export the best potatoes to Russia at inflated prices, while Belarusians were left with the leftovers. It turns out that potatoes were cheap in Belarusian shops, but only on paper. In reality, they were simply just not there. The situation became so critical that the regime resorted to sacrilege. It raised the price ceiling by 36% and allowed the import of potatoes from the EU and even from, quote, unfriendly countries. In other words, Belarusians are now being saved by, yes, Polish potatoes. Who would have thought, right? Yesterday an enemy, today a strategic supplier of tubers. And what did Alexander Lukashenko do? Well, instead of solving the problem, the Belarusian government found someone to blame. Retailers were accused of causing the shortage, fines were introduced for the absence of potatoes on shelves, shops are now a theater of the absurd. There are no potatoes, but they are still being punished for it. Belarus has gone down in history as a country that lost its national treasure, potatoes. Lukashenko keeps saying that just a little more and the harvest will be 10 times bigger. But for now, Belarusians are left without potato pancakes, but with another round of political drama. The former so-called People's Governor of Donbass and current terrorist Pavel Gubarev made a statement that the Kremlin definitely won't be framing for the office wall. According to him, Russian soldiers' trust in the Russian authorities is a big, whopping zero.
Веры нет, там давно нет веры. Рейтинг Кремля внутри армии, он нулевой. То есть доверия нет никакого. Доверия нет, понимания есть всех событий, которые происходят.
Now, if we are to believe Gubarev, the Russian military understands perfectly well what is happening both on the front lines and in politics. They no longer believe the fairy tales about, quote, taking Kyiv in 3 days and fighting NATO. It turns out that even those whom the Kremlin feeds daily with propaganda on TV are beginning to sense defeat. The situation does seem absurd. Soldiers are fighting for Putin's imperial fantasies, yet they don't respect Putin himself. It's like playing chess without a king, only pawns, and most of them want to flee the board. When even terrorists admit that the Kremlin has lost the army's trust, it becomes clear that the special military operation has already failed. And now the only thing keeping soldiers on the front line isn't loyalty to Putin, it's fear of their own commanders. And that's all for this edition of Break the Fake. I'm Skaya. Thanks for watching, and stay with us here for more on TVP World.